Well, this that I'm holding in my hand is called the mystery box. And there was a time in our church history where the mystery box was a big thing, and everybody, the kids especially, longed for the mystery box and wanted to have the mystery box. So, what we used to do during the summer months to give our regular workers a break is we would shut down children's ministry, and then we would have one of the services would be a family service. All the kids would come to that service, and part of the service was each week a kid got the mystery box. They would put something inside, and that at the end of our little family service, what would happen, it would be opened up, and my job was I had to connect whatever the kid brought in the box to that day's lesson, and then there were a group of kids who I was facing off against, and they were doing their thing, and of course then we had made it a competition, and for some reason I always lost the competition. But so now what we do is we get, usually college students, or we have a elementary school teacher this year who take over children's ministry in the summer to give our regular workers a break, and the mystery box for the most part stays hidden. But there's one time, the most famous mystery box of all times. This goes back, it was before we were still in the middle school. We were doing the portable church thing, bringing, carrying all the church in. Basically everything you see on stage went into a crate, and then that crate got emptied out, filled back up at the end. And the kids come, so here's the picture. So here they are with the mystery box. This is the updated version. It had gotten beaten up a little bit. There you see on the far left, that's Danielle, and that's Hannah, who had the box that day, and then Jenna, and then Aiden, and then the little girl who isn't quite sure what's happening there is Michaela, okay? And the reason why this is one of the most famous mystery boxes of all time is because this was the one time, you see my face, that's a legit shock, because the kids put a live animal in the box. And this particular animal was a frog, okay? So I reach into the box and I cup and I grab the frog, right? And then I stand up and like an idiot, like I want to show everybody, and like, oh, here, look at what the kids brought. And of course, he's a frog. What is a frog gonna do? He's gonna jump right out of my hands, and you can't see it. But like, if you have like the print of this, actually, you can see the frog right there. And there he goes. And of course, you can also see the joy right here. Now, this one right here, Hannah, who brought the frog, Hannah was a critter lover. Always loved animals, always loved, when you go visit her when she was that age, she was always handing you some sort of bug, some sort of little thing. One time, we were in the backyard. It was the parents had invited people over for a picnic, so we're having this picnic, and Hannah says, Pastor Joe, a snake, get the snake. So I pick up the snake, okay? And in Michigan, we've got these Mississauga rattlers, right? But I don't know a Mississauga rattler from a gardener snake. I don't know anything. So here I am, Pastor Joe, passing around the rattlesnake to the little kids who want to be, here, my turn. Okay, your turn, right? The neighbor comes yelling, screaming outside. What are you doing? Put that snake down. Don't let those kids play with that snake. Okay? And to this day now, Hannah, so you can see how old she is there. Okay, now she's going into her third year of college, and what is she learning how to do? Veterinarian, right? She wants to be a vet. She is actually learning how to fix horses. She wants to be a horse physical therapist. So when a horse gets injured, she's the one that will bring the horse back. Okay, and so here is, like, it's out of my hands, so it jumps out of my, and you can see the kids, like, wrangling up their frog, and you see all the joy. And then poor Michaela. Now, Michaela's off to high school this year, but still, she's not quite sure what's happening, just that her big sister is up there. And look at Aiden and Jenna here. Jenna turned 21 yesterday. Aiden is off to Calvin College in a couple of weeks here. So here's the thing about the mystery box and the joy of the mystery box. If you're a parent and you have, raised children to adulthood, what you realize is part of the big mystery is what they'll become. Like kind of our kids are literally a mystery. And if you would have asked me 20 years ago, and actually if you would have asked my son 20 years ago what he would be doing now, I would have said, well, he'll probably be a school teacher and a coach. And he would have said, I'll probably be a school teacher and a coach. And at that time, that 20 years ago, I was still a school teacher and a coach, and it just seemed he loved hockey, he loved playing hockey, and when we would sit and talk hockey for hours and hours and hours, his coach's wheels were turning. And so that made complete sense. My son is not a coach and is not a teacher right now. He's doing something completely different. And that mystery of who we're going to become is part of what our stories are. And how that unfolds is part of our story. So if you haven't been here over the last couple of months, we've been talking about bringing our stories. And as we bring our stories, some people have written songs about things that have happened in their life and songs about where God is in their life. And so they have shared those and we'll continue to share them. If you go out into the hallway, there's that banner up there and you're starting to see leaves get onto the banner. And those leaves are the lyrics of the songs. And what we're encouraging people to do is we're encouraging people now to write out your story. And if you weren't here last week, Elisa Clark gave the message, and I would encourage you to go online and listen to Elisa's message. It's excellent, and why I love it is it's just a lot of practical suggestions about here's how you write. And one of her practical suggestions was, you could just write 1 or 2 words that mean something to you. And you could write those down, and we would put that on a leaf. And so what we're going to do with that is we're going to do this Songs of Summer. It's going to be a special worship night on August 22nd. So on that night, all those songs that you've heard over the last few weeks, including that one where there wasn't a dry eye in the congregation when Rachel Lewis, who in that picture Rachel Lewis would have been there that day, and she would have been about as tall as all those kids. But now she's a young adult, and she did this song just right from her heart that was beautiful. Like I say, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. So this Matt's songs that he has done for us over this, Jen's songs, Jessica's songs, those songs will be a part of it, and then we're going to throw some just of our regular worship stuff in there. But now I want you to think about today your story about what God is doing in your life. And so this is the idea of finding God in all things. And as I come back to my son for a second, he now, he had some years of struggle, and those years of struggle were really difficult for my wife Joanne and I. And he was down at Wayne State. If you would have asked him 20 years ago, he would have said, I think I'm going to go to Hope College. But by the time college started, Hope was out of the plan. He ended up going to Wayne State, which it's a good school. I graduated from Wayne State. But he was at a totally different place. And so there he is at Wayne State, and he's doing what a lot of college kids do. He's waiting tables, and he's tending bar, and he's just making some extra money. And the people that he's working for see something in him, and they like how he works, and they like how his mind works, And they say to him, we'd like to make you the general manager of this place. Would you be willing to do that? And the place was a place by the name of Cliff Bells, which is a really fancy jazz club in downtown Detroit behind the Fox Theater. And he says to me, Dad, they're asking me to do this, and I got to do it right. I can't screw this up. They're giving me this big responsibility. So I got to take a semester off of school. I'm going to take a semester off of school, but then I'll get back to my classes. But just because I want to make sure I don't let these people down. That was over 10 years ago. He hasn't taken a class since. But you know what? The mystery of who he's to become got unfolded as he struggled with, well, am I supposed to do this? Am I supposed to do that? And then he pours himself into that, and he makes some mistakes, and he learns from those mistakes. And now, all these years later, he's the general manager of one of the best restaurants in the whole state. And you didn't have to clap, but but I appreciate it. You appreciate it. I'll let him know. So that story, that journey, that's what I want to talk today about, because that is how we find God in all things. So, to help us do this, I want to take you back to a guy by the name of Ignatius of Loyola. And in honor of Associate Pastor Phil over here, we're going to Ignatius of Loyola. Those of you who love Phil's teaching, which is coming to a church near you very, very soon, by the way, those of you who love know that he always teaches us from church history. He brings that into his lessons. And so today our church history guy is a guy by the name of Ignatius of Loyola. Let me talk to you about him for just a second. So here's the thing about Ignatius. Here's what I love about Ignatius. So Ignatius comes to us from a time when the church is in upheaval, when there's lots of arguments about who's right and who's wrong and how are we doing church and what's the right way to do church. What does it really mean when we could take communion? What does it mean to be saved? And people are going back and forth. And so those of you who know church history, you would recognize names like Martin Luther and John Calvin. And all these people are arguing back and forth. And this is what we call the Reformation. And in the Reformation, the church is being reformed. And most of the arrows, at first anyways, are being pointed at the Roman Catholic Church. People like Martin Luther and John Calvin are saying to the Roman Catholic Church, you're doing it wrong. You're making mistakes. And now here comes Ignatius. And Ignatius makes a determination. Ignatius's determination is, I'm going to stick with the Catholic Church. I'm not going to go anywhere. But what he did, what I love, is he didn't go back and forth with Luther about the differences between transubstantiation and consubstantiation, which they were doing. You'll never need to know what those words mean, okay? But that's the minutia that they were going back and forth on. And Loyola does something completely different. You know what he says to his Catholic brothers and sisters? He says, you know what? They're making some good points, you guys. What they're saying to us is that we're too focused on ourselves. We're too focused on our comfort. We're too focused on our success. It's all about us, us, us. We're supposed to be shepherding the flock of God, and we make everything about us and our needs and our comfort even. He said, we can't do this. We got to do a better job of preparing ourselves for ministry. So he comes up with a plan, and his plan is called the spiritual exercises. And his spiritual exercises work like this. Before you could devote yourself to a religious life, before you could become a pastor, you had to spend time in retreat. And the retreat was 4 to 5 weeks. It wasn't an exact time because different people, you would go through it at your own pace. But generally, it took you 4 to 5 weeks to go through. And what you did in those 4 to 5 weeks is you simply meditated on the life of Jesus Christ by reading gospel stories. Now, to meditate in the ancient world, right, go all the way back to Hebrew, like to meditate is like, it really, one way you could say it is to mutter. It's like to regurgitate. Like you just keep going over it and you just keep thinking about it. And you just keep asking the question, what is God teaching me through this? So in my preparation, one of my preparations for ministry, one of the things that I did was I went through the spiritual exercises. Now I couldn't leave my wife Joanne for 5 weeks. I mean, maybe I could. She might have been happy if she was like, yeah, go ahead, right? But I didn't leave my wife Joanne for 5 weeks. There's a way you can do it where when you do it in, the one chunk in the month, you meet with a spiritual director every day and you say, okay, these are the passages that I meditated on. You're just following along with the ones Ignatius laid out. Read this gospel story, then read this gospel story. You do that over a time. I think it took me 6 or 7 months to go through all the meditations, and then I met with my spiritual director once a week, and we talked about them. And week 1 was like, we got to ease you into this. Okay, so Joe, here's what you're going to do for week 1. You're going to meditate on Psalm 139. If you don't know Psalm 139, it's the famous one where it says, the psalmist says, I thank you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. So you're supposed to meditate on that. And then you're supposed to read the first principle. You're supposed to read the first principle and foundation. And so this is kind of what's guiding you and leading you, the first principle and foundation. And, the first time you read through it, you just go, oh, that's nice. But as I was meditating on this for a full week, I got to a point where I said, wait a minute. That's ridiculous. That is different than anything I have ever learned in my life. That is not how I was brought up. Now, I was brought up Christian, right? And you're going to read it. As you go through it the first time, it might not stick out to you. But see if you can pick it up. Let me read it to you. Try to find what is completely different than our society. The goal of our life is to live with God forever. So far, we're good, right? Nothing crazy here. The goal of our life is to live with God forever. God, who loves us, gave us life. Our own responsive love allows God's life to flow into us without limit. All things in this world are gifts of God, presented to us so that we can know God more easily and make a return of love more readily. As a result, we appreciate and use all the gifts of God insofar as they help us develop as loving persons. But if any of these gifts become the center of our lives, they displace God and so hinder our growth toward our goal. In everyday life, then, we must hold ourselves in balance before all of these created gifts, insofar as we have a choice and are not bound by some obligation. We should not fix our desires on health or sickness, wealth or poverty, success or failure, a long life or a short one. For everything has the potential of calling forth in us a deeper response to our life in God. Our only desire and our one choice should be this: I want and I choose what better leads to God's deepening his life in me. Now, the part, and I don't know if it was day 3 or day 4 of praying through this and meditating on this, the part where I'm like, wait, that's crazy. That might be the dumbest thing I've ever heard, was this. We should not fix our desires on health or sickness, wealth or poverty, success or failure, a long life or short one. Everything I've been taught in the first 4 decades of my life, I was probably around 40 when I did this, was you seek health, wealth, success, and a long life. And I say that's the American way. That's the human way. You seek health, wealth, success, and a long life. And now, for me to be spiritual, I have to say, I don't care. And some of you have the look on your face that I had when I went back to my spiritual director, like, how is that even possible? How is that possible for a human being to do that? And watch as we go through this, the importance of this, right? Paul understood it. Now Paul, if you don't know Paul, he was a guy who followed Jesus, and he started a lot of the first churches, and he writes a lot of letters to the first churches, and he tells them how to be in this world. And so when he writes the book of Philippians, it's very late in his life. Paul died around 64 AD, 65 AD maybe, and right before he died, he was imprisoned. And so he writes these letters from prison. The book of Philippians is one of them. So this is about 62 AD. So it's late in his life following Christ. And he says this. Now, do it this way and ask yourself, don't you want this? I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Now watch. I have learned. Paul talks an awful lot about God's grace as this free gift that we're given. He talks an awful lot about the fruit of the Holy Spirit. The fruit of the Holy Spirit that is given to us. The Holy Spirit working in our lives. Now, he says, I have learned. I have learned. And he learned it by going through hardship. He learned it by going through difficult times, which is why Ignatius says, don't focus on success or failure. Focus on what is God teaching me through this moment. In the midst of failure, God has something for me. And since my only goal in life is to draw closer to God, in the midst of this failure, in the midst of this pain, where is God? How will I find God? How will I understand God? And so this gets us to Ignatius's crazy idea of holy indifference. Now, I want to tell you what it is, and I want to tell you what it isn't so that we can understand it. First, a little bit of a definition. It's being dispassionate about what happens to us as long as it is for the glory of God and draws us closer to God. Being dispassionate about what happens to us as long as we use it as an opportunity to draw us closer to God. So, what isn't it, right? Nope, I jumped ahead. When Paul says this is holy indifference. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. It's AD 62, probably. He's under arrest. There's this crazy guy taking charge of Rome by the name of Nero, and Nero is, for lack of a good term, an idiot. And he is going to be persecuting and killing Christians left and right before too long. And Paul is in the middle of that. So when he says to his friends in Philippi, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain, it's not a bumper sticker. It's his life. He believes it. He experiences it. It's his reality. It's not day 168 of his 365 days of Christian sayings calendar. It's his everyday. It's his life. And so let's make sure we understand what it's not. Now I'm in the right spot. And I will have my tape back next week. Sorry about it's fallen. So holy indifference is not being passionless. It's not having passion. It's not even close to that. So going back to my son, right? He says, I'm going to take, the words every parent longs to hear. I'm going to take a semester off college. And again, it's over 10 years ago, right? But what I love about what he did at that moment is he was passionate about it. He said, Dad, they're giving me this responsibility, and I've got to take it serious. And so he poured himself into it. So it's not being passionate, not having any passion about life. Well, it doesn't matter what happens to me, so I'm not going to go to school. I'm not going to try. I'm not going to have dreams and ambitions and goals. It's having dreams and ambitions and goals, but realizing that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is our life in eternity with God. So how is God drawing us closer to himself through those things? So first off, it's not being lacking with having no passion. And second off, it's not being fake. So I'm wholly indifferent. So terrible things are happening in my life, and I just pretend like I'm not hurt, and I just pretend like it doesn't matter, and I just pretend like, well, it's okay. I know God's got a plan. And okay. I showed you the pictures. Like I said, Aiden's on his way to college. Jenna is finishing up college in statistical studies. She's going to be in actuarial, I believe, and she'll be able to tell us exactly how long we'll all live. Aiden's on his way to studying to be a teacher, right? So, right? But the other girl in there was Danielle. And Danielle, unfortunately, she moved down to Florida shortly after that picture was taken. And a couple of years after being in Florida for a couple of years, she was tragically killed on an ATV accident. And, Shannon and I hopped on a plane and down to Florida to be with the family, and we stayed with Phil and Sandy Peavy House, who are some of our snowbirds, and so they were down there, and they had a spot for us to stay, and they picked us up at the airport and took us to the funeral home and took us to be with the family. And you can think that this holy indifference is, it's not a big deal that we lost Danielle. It's a huge deal. It broke our hearts. And we still are in touch with her mom, Jen, and Jen was just here a few weeks ago. When she's in town, she stops by. So this holy difference is not being passionate. It's not being fake. But what is it then? It's struggle, and it's wonder, and it's our story. And so it's having the courage to struggle with what is happening in our lives. Not pretending like we don't care, not pretending like it doesn't hurt. It's having the courage to struggle, and in the struggle to wonder, what am I learning about God right now? What am I learning about me right now? What does God have for me in this moment? So here's the questions. Last week, again, go back and listen to Elisa. She did a really nice job. I've got questions for you. They're in your program, so you can take a look, right? So start with, what is God teaching me about God, and what is God teaching me about me? Let's go back to my son Tony for a second, okay? So Tony had some years where he really, really struggled. And when you have a kid who struggles, you struggle right along with them. And it's hard, man. It's hard to walk in that place. And so as Tony is going through his difficult years, now later on, like Joanne and I, joked about it, like, we should have put that page in his scrapbook, the page of us sitting in the back of the courtroom, right? As the judge comes out and, talks to him. Or look, here he is with his court-appointed attorney around, his arm around the shoulder. Or here's the one with us sitting in jail holding the phone between our ears so that we can both talk to him through the glass, right? So everybody, y'all want that page in your kid's scrapbook, right? And what was, so in the midst of that, what was God teaching me about God? What was God teaching me about me? And here's the thing. One way to do that is, what have I put before God? What have I put before God? That is, what have I turned into an idol? Now, in that struggle, this is how we get to holy indifference. This is how we get to freedom. In that struggle, I cried buckets. Buckets of tears. Joanne cried buckets of tears. But we struggled. But we stayed with God. And what I learned about me was that I had made an idol out of my son's happiness. I had turned my son's happiness into the most important thing in the world. And I have no idea. Look, a therapist will help him figure out how that impacted him at some point, okay? But I have no idea the pressure, unspoken, but I have no idea the pressure that put on that kid to perform, right? We all want to be the source of somebody else's happiness and joy. Who wants that pressure? So I had put on my son Tony, right? I had made an idol out of his happiness. So when he wasn't happy, when he wasn't struggling, when he was struggling, I fell apart. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to find God. I was a mess. But see, holy indifference comes from struggle and wonder. And as I wondered, what was God teaching me about me? What God spoke to me in over months, right? Over that struggle is, you got this backwards, man. Don't make an idol out of your kid. Love your kid. Let your kid be who he's going to be. Let him go. And seek what? Seek first the kingdom. Seek first my kingdom, my righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. I had it totally backwards. And here's the beauty of my dysfunction. Maybe it's the beauty of your dysfunction. It's really easy to make my dysfunction noble. You can look really good. I'm sacrificing for my kid. I'm just doing it all for my kid. I'm helping my kid. That looks really good in life, right? And yet, I'm making him an idol. I'm not letting him be who God created him to be. Because why? Because what am I seeking? Success. comfort. So, and what's a better feeling? You know, those parents know, oh, your kid, right? Seeing your kid succeed, right? Oh, look. And how does that reflect on us? Boy, aren't I amazing? Look at me. Look at the kid I turned out. And we get big heads, and we fill with pride, and we made an idol out of our kid. We used them. Just like Abraham bringing him up for the sacrifice. Right? What is God teaching me about me? Now look, man. It's struggle, it's wonder. That moment where I've turned my son into an idol. Oh my gosh. You know what was on the other side of that? Freedom. Because then I could just let him be who he was going to be. I could back off. I could take the pressure off. It's not that I didn't encourage him. I still encourage him. It's not that I didn't love him. I still love him. But all this angst inside of me was gone. I was free. And I could enjoy his journey. And you know what a big part of my son's journey is? Screwing up and learning from it. See, now, 10 years later, on the other side, you know what he says? Well, first of all, he says a couple of things. I used to always call him when I was going to talk about him in a message. He finally just said, Dad, I put you through all that. You have blanket approval to say anything. If I made you live through those years, you have blanket approval. You can use them whenever you want. Okay? And so I didn't call him on this one because I got the blank check, right? But to be able to see him, right, on the other side of the struggle, what he says right now, he goes, Dad, those are rough years. But they made me the person that I am. And I thought he was going to be a teacher and a coach, and he's this general manager of one of the best restaurants in the state, right? And he does a fantastic job. And it's fun watching him as he runs around that place coaching and teaching. And he's got that pastor heart. A couple of times a year, I get the phone call. Because look, he works in the service industry. You're going to have a lot of people who struggle with addiction in that industry, right? So he'll call me a couple of times a year. Hey, Dad, I got to help somebody, one of his employees, get into rehab. You got some numbers that I can call. I know somebody's got to get to rehab, so he'll call me. He'll call a couple of times a year and say, this person doesn't have health care. Where's that free clinic? One time, he even told one of his employees, he's helping this employee, and he just like, as lovingly as he could, he said, you know, you got a lot going on in your life. You could really use a pastor. Would it be okay if I gave my dad your number? And so I called this woman up, and we met for a number of months and helped her walk. She had a ton going on. Medical issues, kid issues, all the stuff. Right? So he's doing that. He's living that. And man, it's so much more fun to just be able to sit back and watch him be him versus and take my need and my junk off of him and watch him grow. So what is God teaching me about me? What is God teaching me about God? Seek first his kingdom, his righteousness, not my ideas, right? Because what happened? If any of these gifts become the center of our lives, they displace God and so hinder our growth toward our goal. And look, I'm not going to ask you to confess this right out loud, right? But how many of us have made an idol out of our children and have made an idol out of our children's happiness? And you know how I'm not going to look anybody in the eye right now because I don't want you to think I'm thinking about you. Okay? So, But how many of us have done it? How many of us have done it? I've done it. But so that's the struggle. And then that's the wonder. And then the last two questions. How am I being called to love and live differently? And how am I being prepared for eternity? How am I being called to love and live differently? I don't know if Tony notices the difference, but I notice the difference in me. And the difference in me is I just love him way, way, way more freely than I was ever able to do in the past. And I don't need him to be perfect in a way I needed him to be perfect before. And I don't need to have him, always present the perfect picture of him like I needed that before. Because that was all about me and my need to look good and my need to be right and my need to have the successful kid. And why is he a successful kid? Because I'm such a wonderful dad. It almost made you want to puke when I said that, didn't it? And yet, we do that, don't we, man? Don't we do that? And here's your story, see? Here's the story that you can share. What's your struggle been? What's the place where you weren't seeking first the kingdom and his righteousness? What's the place where you got caught, even if it looked noble, like me? It is a trick. A trick of Satan, but a trick nonetheless, to be able to make your dysfunction look good. But, how many of us can do it? So that's your story. That's my story. So you know what the call to faith is today, because it's been the call to faith for about 2 months now. And we're really hoping you'll take us up on it, including if you just do Elisa's, I'm just going to do a few words. And you can do it anonymously. You can just put it in an envelope and drop it in the basket when it comes by. Everybody will be thinking you're putting in a big, oh, look at how thick their envelope is, right? You'll just be, no, it's just some letters, right? This is my story. Your story is important. Your story is important. Learning, Paul says, I have learned to be content in any and all circumstances. I wish my son didn't have to go through all those difficult years so that I could learn how to be content. But God's not going to waste anything, right? And if Tony's going to go through those struggles, then God's going to take that and he's going to use it, and I'm going to be more free on the other side. And I am not saying, do not hear me saying God caused that. Sin and ugliness in the world caused it. Sin and ugliness inside of me caused it. I'm the one who made him an idol. Me. But I have learned to be, not in all circumstances, but I've learned how to be content now as a parent in a way I never had before. I thank God for that freedom. I thank God for that journey. I thank God for loving me through that journey. I thank God for sticking with me through that journey. That's my story of God's love in my life. What's your story of God's love in your life? And yeah, I'm going to ask it again. Will you share it, okay? Will you, and I'm not saying you got to come up here, right? Will you write it out? For what you're comfortable with, we'll add some leaves to our poster out there. So will you reflect on and share your story of what God has been doing in your life?